There is no free tool, no paid tool, and no setting anywhere inside Windows that will disable all Microsoft data collection. That's not a disclaimer to soften what's coming. It's the single most important thing to understand before you touch a single toggle, because some of what Windows sends back to Microsoft isn't spying in the way people mean when they use that word online. It's tied directly to how Windows Update verifies your system is patched, how Defender checks for active threats, and how licensing and activation confirm your copy of the operating system is legitimate. Sever those completely and you're not protecting yourself, you're breaking core functionality of the machine you're trying to protect. What you can do, and what an entire category of free, legitimate software has been built specifically to do, is take control of everything else, the enormous layer of optional data collection, advertising infrastructure, AI feature integration, and tracking that Microsoft ships active by default and never clearly tells you how to turn off. That layer is bigger than most people realize, and the tool that's become the most trusted way to handle it is called O&O ShutUp10++, and it's completely free. Let's talk about what it actually is, because there's a lot of noise online about privacy tools, some of it legitimate, some of it sketchy software bundling unwanted extras, or worse, actual malware disguised as a privacy fix. O&O ShutUp10++ is neither of those things. It's developed by O&O Software, a German software company with a long track record building Windows utilities, and it's been maintained and updated continuously, with the current version released as recently as early August 2026, meaning it's actively kept in sync with the latest Windows 11 changes, rather than being an abandoned tool from years ago that no longer matches how modern Windows actually behaves. It's portable, which means it doesn't require installation at all. You download a single executable file, typically named OOSU10, exe, and you can run it directly, even from a USB drive, without it writing itself into your system the way a traditional installed application would. No extra software gets bundled in during that process. Nothing else gets downloaded alongside it. You get exactly the tool, nothing else writing along with it. Here's how it actually works under the hood, because understanding the mechanism matters if you're going to trust a tool with this level of access to your system. ShutUp10++ doesn't invent new privacy protections that don't already exist inside Windows. Instead, it works directly with Windows' own internal settings, the policies, registry keys, background services, and privacy configurations that the operating system already exposes, including a large number that are hidden from the standard settings app entirely, or scattered across so many different menus that almost nobody finds all of them manually. Rather than making you hunt through privacy and security, then general, then diagnostics, then app permissions, then 5 other submenus individually, it pulls all of those controls into one organized window and lets you manage them from a single place. When you open it for the first time, you'll see it split your options across 2 main scopes. Current user affects only your specific account on the machine, and every serious guide covering this tool tells you to start there. It's the lower risk starting point. It won't affect other accounts on a shared computer, and it gives you a chance to see how the system behaves before making changes that apply system-wide. Local machine, by contrast, affects every account on that device, which makes it a more advanced option, best reserved for people who've already tested their preferred settings on their own account first and are confident about the consequences. More recent versions have also added a dedicated Copilot category, specifically built to manage Microsoft's AI Assistant integration, which tells you everything you need to know about how directly this tool has had to evolve just to keep pace with how much new tracking and AI-driven data collection Windows 11 has added in the past 2 years alone. Beyond those top-level scopes, the settings themselves are organized into clear thematic categories, so you're never lost in an unfamiliar wall of toggles. Security-related settings live together, privacy settings live together. There's a dedicated section for Edge, since Microsoft's browser carries its own separate layer of tracking and telemetry independent of the operating system itself. Every individual setting inside these categories comes with a color-coded recommendation: green for changes considered safe for virtually anyone, yellow or amber for changes that improve privacy further but might disable a convenience feature you actually use, and red for changes that go the furthest but carry the highest chance of breaking something you didn't expect. That color system is the single most useful feature for a non-technical user, because it means you're never guessing whether a given toggle is going to quietly disable something you needed. And this is where the real, honest guidance matters, because it's exactly where a lot of amateur tutorials get people into trouble. The safest, most consistently recommended way to use this tool is to start by applying only the settings marked with the green recommendation all at once with a single click. That's considered the safe baseline for essentially every user, technical or not. From there, the responsible move is to use your computer normally for a while, let updates run, let your usual apps behave the way they normally do, and confirm nothing important broke. Only after that, should you consider layering in the yellow and amber settings, described in the tool itself as recommended with caution, understanding clearly that at this stage you may lose access to certain convenience features you were using without realizing it. Things like certain personalized suggestions, certain background sync behaviors, or certain Copilot linked functionality. The most aggressive option, applying every single available setting, including the ones marked red, exists in the tool, but it comes with a direct warning built into the software itself. This is only for users who have a firm grasp of the consequences, because it carries the highest likelihood that something you actually rely on stops working the way you expect. Racing straight to that option, because a video told you to disable everything at once, is exactly the kind of poor quality advice that gives privacy tools a bad reputation when something inevitably breaks. One of the most useful and most underappreciated features of this tool is what happens after you've configured it exactly the way you want. You can export your entire configuration as a settings file, essentially a saved profile of every choice you made, which means you can carry that exact privacy setup across multiple computers instantly rather than manually reconfiguring everything from scratch on every new machine or rebuilding it after a fresh Windows install. That same export function also protects you against one of the most frustrating realities of using Windows long-term. Major updates have a well-documented habit of quietly reverting privacy settings back toward Microsoft's preferred defaults. It's happened repeatedly across Windows 10 and Windows 11 feature updates, where a setting you deliberately turned off months earlier gets silently switched back on after a big update lands. With an exported configuration file saved, getting back to your preferred setup after that happens takes seconds, rather than another full manual pass through every menu. There's also a free tier limitation worth being upfront about, because pretending otherwise wouldn't be honest. The free version of ShutUp10++ applies your chosen settings when you run it, but it doesn't sit in the background afterward, continuously watching for Windows to quietly revert them. A separate premium version from the same developer does offer that ongoing background monitoring, automatically reapplying your chosen settings the moment Windows tries to reset them after an update, without you needing to remember to rerun anything manually. That premium tier is a paid product, and if you want a completely hands-off, set it and forget it forever experience, that's the version built for it. But for the vast majority of users, the free version is entirely sufficient. It just means building a simple habit. After any major Windows update lands, particularly the large annual feature updates rather than routine monthly patches, it's worth relaunching ShutUp10++, reviewing what it flags as changed, and reapplying your saved configuration in a few clicks. It even tells you directly, every time you open it, exactly which of your previously chosen settings have shifted since your last run, so you're never guessing what Windows quietly changed behind your back. Real-world testing from independent reviewers backs up that this tool genuinely works as advertised without the horror stories that sometimes surround aggressive Windows tweaking utilities. One detailed hands-on review from earlier this year described applying the green recommended settings along with a careful, selective pass through some of the amber and a handful of red options, only touching settings the reviewer fully understood, and reported the system continued working correctly afterward, including successfully installing subsequent Windows updates without issue. That's the pattern worth trusting. Careful, incremental, understood changes, not a blind, full-force pass through every available toggle at once. It's also worth being clear about what this tool is not, because there's a meaningful difference between reducing what Windows collects and eliminating your digital footprint from Microsoft's ecosystem entirely, and conflating the two leads to disappointment. ShutUp10++ works by adjusting settings, policies, and registry values that Windows itself already exposes as controllable, even when Microsoft doesn't make them easy to find. It is not modifying or rebuilding Windows at a deeper level. It's not stripping out core system files. And it's not going to remove telemetry that's genuinely load-bearing for essential functions like security patching. If your goal is a far more aggressive rebuild, stripping pre-installed bloatware entirely, or constructing a custom Windows image from scratch, that falls into a different, more advanced category of tools entirely, often requiring you to build a fresh installation image rather than adjust settings on a running system. And those tools carry meaningfully higher technical risk and are generally reserved for advanced users comfortable troubleshooting their own operating system if something goes wrong. If you decide this is the right tool for you, the steps to actually get started are straightforward enough that you genuinely don't need deep technical knowledge to do this safely, provided you follow the careful, staged approach rather than rushing it. Download the executable directly from O&O Software's official site, rather than a random third-party download aggregator, since privacy tools are a favorite disguise for malware distributors specifically because people searching for them are primed to trust anything claiming to protect them. Save the file somewhere you'll remember, run it directly since no installation step is required, and when the window opens, start with the current user scope rather than local machine. From there, apply only the green recommended settings as your first pass, close the tool, and use your computer normally for several days. If everything behaves the way you expect, come back, open it again, and this time consider layering in the amber level settings one category at a time rather than all at once, checking in on your system's behavior as you go rather than applying everything simultaneously and trying to diagnose which single change caused a problem after the fact. Before you make any changes at all, it's worth creating a Windows system restore point first, a 5-minute step that costs you nothing and gives you a clean rollback option if something genuinely does go sideways, which, done carefully, is unlikely, but costs nothing to prepare for anyway. Once you've got your preferred configuration dialed in, export that settings file immediately and store it somewhere safe, a cloud drive you trust, an external drive, anywhere you'll be able to find it again. That single file is what turns this from a one-time fix into a repeatable, portable privacy setup you can restore in seconds on this machine after the next major update, or instantly deploy on a brand new computer without repeating the entire manual process from scratch. Before going further, it's worth addressing something directly, because if you've spent any time searching for disable Windows spying online, you've already run into a minefield of sketchy results. This category of software is one of the most heavily targeted spaces for fake tools, cracked bundles, and outright malware, precisely because the audience searching for it is emotionally primed to trust anything that promises to protect them. Fake privacy cleaners that actually install adware, cracked versions of legitimate tools laced with malicious payloads, and browser extensions claiming to block Microsoft tracking while secretly harvesting your data themselves, all of it circulates constantly around this exact search intent. That's precisely why sticking to a tool with a long, verifiable track record, active ongoing development, a real company behind it, and coverage from established independent tech outlets matters so much more here than it might for an average piece of software. O&O ShutUp10 clears that bar. A random executable you found on a forum post or a sketchy download aggregator you've never heard of does not, no matter how convincing the video promoting it looks. It's also worth understanding how this tool fits alongside the other names that come up in the same conversation, because you'll see them mentioned together often, and they're not interchangeable. AppBuster, sometimes bundled or discussed alongside ShutUp10 in reviews, focuses specifically on stripping out pre-installed bloatware apps, the pinned store apps and trial software window ships with by default, rather than tackling the deeper privacy and telemetry settings ShutUp10 is built for. They solve related but different problems, and using them together, bloatware removal alongside settings-level privacy control, is a common combination among people serious about cleaning up a fresh Windows install. Then there's a more advanced category entirely, tools built around constructing custom, debloated Windows installation images from scratch, stripping out entire components before Windows is even installed rather than adjusting settings after the fact. That approach goes considerably further, and it comes with considerably more risk and technical overhead, generally recommended only for users who are comfortable rebuilding a system from an installation image and troubleshooting compatibility issues if something doesn't work as expected afterward. For the overwhelming majority of people watching this looking for a genuinely safe, reversible, beginner-friendly fix, ShutUp10 sits at exactly the right level of power without that added risk. Let's also talk honestly about what actually happens on the Windows side when you use this tool, because understanding the mechanism helps you trust it rather than treat it as some kind of black box. Every change. ShutUp10 makes routes through Windows' own supported configuration systems, primarily group policy and the Windows registry, the same underlying systems an IT administrator would use to lock down privacy settings across an entire company's fleet of computers. That matters because it means the tool isn't doing anything Windows wasn't already designed to allow. It's not injecting foreign code into the operating system, it's not patching system files, and it's not doing anything that falls outside boundaries Microsoft itself built and documented for exactly this kind of configuration. That's a meaningfully different risk profile than tools that modify core system files directly. And it's a large part of why this particular tool has maintained trust across the privacy and security community for as long as it has, through multiple Windows 10 feature updates and now well into the Windows 11 era. That said, respecting the tool means respecting its limits too. And being straightforward about where those limits sit protects you from disappointment. Some Windows behavior genuinely can't be fully eliminated through settings alone because Microsoft has built certain features, particularly around Windows Update, security patching, and license validation, as non-negotiable parts of how the operating system stays functional and secure. ShutUp10 won't touch those, and it shouldn't, because breaking them doesn't make you more private. It makes your machine unpatched and vulnerable. which is a considerably worse trade than the data collection you were trying to avoid in the first place. Anyone promising you a tool that eliminates 100% of everything Windows sends anywhere, with zero trade-offs and zero risk to functionality, isn't giving you an honest picture of how this actually works. The fair question at this point is simply, does this actually make a meaningful difference, or is it mostly symbolic? The honest answer, based on what the tool actually targets, is that it makes a real, substantial difference to the layer of collection that exists for advertising, personalization, and optional feature telemetry, which, as covered in the broader reporting on Windows 11 this year, is a genuinely large layer. The advertising identifier that lets apps and advertisers track your behavior system-wide, the tiered diagnostic data collection that goes well beyond basic crash reporting, tailored advertising experiences, search highlights, injecting promotional content into your start menu, Copilot integration you never explicitly asked to enable, all of that sits squarely within what this tool is built to control. That's not symbolic. That's the exact category of default, permissive, buried in menus data collection that's driven the wave of criticism and watchdog warnings covered everywhere from PC World to independent privacy researchers throughout 2026. Closing that layer down is a genuinely meaningful reduction in what leaves your machine, even while the smaller security critical layer necessarily remains. There's one more practical piece of advice worth including, because it's the kind of thing that separates a smooth experience from a frustrating one. Don't treat this as a one-time errand you complete and never think about again. Windows 11's major feature updates arrive roughly once or twice a year, and smaller monthly patches arrive constantly, and both categories have a track record of quietly resetting some privacy-related settings back toward Microsoft's defaults, sometimes as an unintended side effect of how the update process works, sometimes because a new feature ships with its own new default that didn't exist before your last configuration pass. Building a simple habit around this, checking in with the tool after major updates specifically, takes only a few minutes and keeps your privacy configuration actually current rather than slowly eroding update after update without you noticing. If you're downloading this for the first time, a couple of extra verification habits are worth building into your routine, especially given how often this exact search intent gets targeted by fake software. Always navigate to the developer's own official site directly rather than clicking through from a random video description or a third-party download aggregator you don't recognize, since typo-squatted domains and fake mirror sites are a common trick specifically aimed at people searching for privacy and security tools. Once downloaded, most modern antivirus and Windows Defender scans will run automatically the moment you launch an unfamiliar executable, and letting that scan complete before proceeding costs you seconds and adds a real layer of reassurance. If a download prompts you to install anything beyond the single expected file or bundles in a browser, toolbar, a system optimizer, or any unrelated software you didn't ask for, that's an immediate red flag that you're not looking at the legitimate tool, and you should close it and go back to the source directly. It's also worth setting expectations about what you'll actually see and feel after applying your first pass of settings, because the changes here are mostly invisible in the way that matters most, which is exactly the point. You won't get a flashy before and after screen showing you a satisfying counter of blocked trackers, the way some flashier, less trustworthy tools try to manufacture a sense of dramatic accomplishment. What you will get is a quieter, more accurate one, an advertising identifier that no longer follows your behavior across apps, a diagnostic pipeline sending meaningfully less back to Microsoft's servers, start menu search results no longer injected with promotional content dressed up as search suggestions, and a feature integration that only activates, because you specifically chose to enable it rather than because it shipped on by default. None of that shows up as a dramatic on-screen animation. It shows up as your operating system quietly doing less behind your back, which is a much less flashy outcome, but it's the actual outcome that matters. For anyone managing more than one computer, whether that's a household with several family machines or a small office environment, the export and import functionality becomes considerably more valuable than it might first appear. Rather than manually working through every category, every color-coded recommendation, and every individual toggle on each separate machine, you configure it carefully once, export that finished profile, and import it directly onto every other machine you're responsible for in a matter of seconds. That turns what could be a repetitive hour-per-machine chore into a 5-minute task across an entire household or small fleet of devices, and it means everyone benefits from the same careful, tested configuration rather than a rushed, inconsistent one, repeated from scratch on every separate installation. One last thing worth carrying with you. After all of this, privacy tools like this one work best as part of a habit, not a single dramatic cleanup session you do once and forget. Set a simple personal reminder, tied to whenever Windows notifies you a major feature update has finished installing, to reopen the tool, glance at what it flags as changed, and reapply your saved profile. That 5-minute check-in, repeated consistently, does more for your actual privacy over the course of a year than any single aggressive pass through every available setting ever could, because it keeps pace with the one thing that never stops changing: what Microsoft decides to turn back on by default the next time it updates your machine. Families and small offices aside, even a single-user home setup benefits from thinking about this the same way you'd think about changing a smoke detector battery or updating a password after a breach notification, a small recurring task rather than a one-time fix. The tool itself makes that easy by telling you exactly what shifted since your last visit, so the check-in never requires you to remember your entire previous configuration from memory. You're not starting over each time. You're simply confirming that what you decided months ago still holds, and nudging it back into place on the rare occasion it doesn't, which is a far better use of your time than rebuilding your privacy setup from scratch every single year. Because it explains why a tool like this has become so relevant specifically in 2026, rather than being a niche utility only power users cared about a decade ago. As covered extensively across independent tech reporting this year, Windows 11's default configuration has expanded considerably with the addition of AI-driven features like Copilot and, on qualifying hardware, Recall, both of which introduce entirely new categories of data collection that simply didn't exist in earlier versions of Windows. A watchdog group, the Center for Digital Rights and Democracy, went so far as to advise users handling sensitive information to avoid Windows 11 entirely earlier this year, arguing that even disabling individual features like Recall might not be enough to fully protect against how much the operating system collects by default. That's the environment this tool exists in. It's not solving a hypothetical problem. It's directly responding to a documented, expanding, well-reported pattern of default data collection that's only grown more aggressive with each major Windows 11 update. And the fact that a free, independently maintained utility has become this widely recommended is itself a reflection of how large that gap between default behavior and user expectation has become. It's also worth understanding why Microsoft hasn't simply built the same level of clarity into Windows itself, because the answer isn't a technical limitation. Microsoft has already proven it can build a genuinely protective consent-first configuration when it's required to. Users inside the European Economic Area get a meaningfully different experience, with explicit consent gates before data flows between Windows and other Microsoft services, a direct result of strict data protection law in that region. That's not a hypothetical better version of Windows. It's a real one, already built, already shipping, just restricted to users covered by regulation strict enough to force it. Everywhere else, the default remains the more permissive configuration, and that's precisely the gap tools like ShutUp10 were built to close manually, for anyone willing to put in a little effort rather than wait for a regulator to force the issue on their behalf. A few common concerns come up constantly whenever this kind of tool gets recommended, and they're worth addressing directly rather than glossing over. The first is whether editing registry values and group policy settings through a third-party interface is inherently dangerous,